Hello again, everybody, and welcome to yet another edition of Freeform Friday on a Tuesday, or as I like to call this, Freeform Tuesday Night Titans. So, this has been an episode that Allan and I have wanted to do for quite some time. And Allan's here, and we are gonna get we're going to get back into the thick of things. This is an episode that we've wanted to do for a really long time, and it's been delayed due to XYZ reasons, both on our parts, but no time like the present to talk about it. What's going on, Allan? What's going on, sir? How are you?
Well, I'm doing great, David. It's great to be back on a regular episode of Freeform Friday, and why not Freeform Friday? Whatever day it is, Freeform Friday? Well, yeah, it's July. Freeform Friday. We're both here and we're feeling fly, but I'll tell you what, we sometimes gotta ask why. Why do the great ones, so young, have to die?
Yes, indeed. We have to ask ourselves that question, just like there's so many other questions we could be asking ourselves in the world of wrestling. And already, Allan, I've lost you. You've already ventured into parts unknown, and you're back.
Trip to parts unknown. I couldn't help myself this time.
Right. So this is going to be one of the shows where you're going to be leading the helm, and a lot of the topics that we're going to be discussing, which all relay along the same thing of those that are no longer with us, that are sadly no longer with us. And these are names that most people don't even know of, and most people have forgotten. So this is going to be something where I throw the baton to you.
Well, thank you, David. And this is exactly why I want to talk about them, because, if you could turn on any wrestling news channel, any podcast, any wrestling news video or whatever, and you're going to hear on and on about Sheamus and Paul Heyman and CM Punk, and you're going to hear, something's interrupting. Can you still hear me out there?
Yeah, I can still hear you okay. I can still hear you okay. You're in solo layout. I put the spotlight onto you, so nobody sees my dark shadow. I don't look like the Big Brother saboteur or the hacker, or I don't look like I'm in the witness protection program.
Oh, well, that's very good then. And a dark sort of thing, because wrestling is missing mystique these days. So if you can add some to it, you can be like the old show, Dark Shadows. It's great. Dark Shadow David. I love it. That's all right. You could be the vampire, even if you're not Vampiro or Danhausen or whoever, you can be Dark Shadow David, and you can be your own unique character, a bit like the Kiss Demon, but a lot more diabolical, perhaps.
Yeah, well, I'm not allergic to light, but even though my skin is quite pasty, I burn easily.
Ah, okay. Well, I hope nobody burns you, not including the sun. But as I was about to say, you could open up any other wrestling news channel, video, internet, whatever. And like I said, you're going to hear all about the latest newsmakers. But I'd rather talk about the people that never got to be millionaires, despite multi-millionaires. All the newsmakers today are multi-millionaires, and everybody's debating and boo-hooing and blah, blah, blah. Well, what about those guys who, gave everything, their body, their soul, their heart, their sacrifice, their families, and everything else to entertain us fans? And they didn't leave multi-millionaires. Some of them were scraping practically the bottom of the barrel and often didn't receive help. Sometimes they did through great organizations like the Cauliflower Alley Club and stuff. But what about those who sacrificed, who we don't talk about because we don't know who they are, a lot of them? And the reason we don't know a lot of them are the obvious two reasons. A, they either wrestled the majority of their career before television programs were saved, before the video and pay-per-view age came in, or premium live events. So basically they're lost a bit to history. And of course the other reason is because WWE controls the narrative, and it's not in their best interest to talk about these people for the most part, not because they necessarily had problems with them, just because most fans don't know who they are and they're not willing to educate them. So So, except with the exception of the first guy we're going to talk about, the other three are mostly under the radar. And I think that's super sad because like they weren't multimillionaires. They gave just as much, if not more, a torturous road schedule. They put up with everything. Bad weather, bad this. They missed their kids' birthdays. They missed it. Not like now, where you can take a mental health leave for a week. You can go book your niece's third cousin 10 times removed's birthday that you want the day off for. That was not done in the old school wrestling business. And a lot of these guys made their livings in the territories, with the exception of the first one. And I think their stories really deserve to be told, especially the stuff that's not even too obvious to those who did know who they were. And I can assure you that's a minority of our viewers, and a minority of most podcast viewers, and certainly viewers of the WWE universe. They don't know who these people were except the first one, maybe. And that's totally unfortunate because now they're not even here anymore to talk about it. You know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah. I mean, Heavy Metal Van Hammer, even certain WWE fans that have come as of late don't even know who Van Hammer is. I do, you do, and certain people who watch this show do, because they were alive and well when you had such a interesting gimmick known as Heavy Metal Van Hammer, who would later be rebranded as a member of Raven's Flock, only to leave Raven's Flock and side with Juventud Guerrera. And
I
won't even get into that.
Right. And that's stuff you could actually access pretty easily, because that's during the video age, the Monday Night Wars, the stuff that's always available. They're going to talk about in various forms. It's always going to be available in more and more ways and other ways. And yeah, exactly. So that's like the obvious stuff. And Van Hammer is a very interesting case, like you said, for his gimmick, first of all, which you're the heavy metal guy. Weren't too many heavy metal dudes in wrestling at that time who you could, on a major platform. The independent scene had it. But it's also interesting because he basically kept a major league job on and off for 10 years, which for a guy who they said never really evolved that much, like, that's pretty remarkable. He was always worth having around just because I guess he was likable. He had a fantastic physique. He had a unique gimmick for the first bunch of years, and just, he was liked by a lot of people who were popular, like Mark Marrow and Marcus Bagwell, and very other bunch of others. Dusty Rhodes, of course, was the guy who brought him in. It was a huge booker. He was a huge booker, but he was also a huge backer of Van Hammer. And I guess we could start, if you're okay with it, by me talking about his life a little bit, the stuff that's not so obvious about his career on Nitro and all that stuff.
No, let's hear it. The stage is yours, and the spotlight is on you.
Oh, thank you, David. Okay, well, Van Hammer, of course, was born Mark Ty Hildreth back in the late 50s. In a city called Hebron in Maryland. So he's like a not too far from Baltimore boy, which is traditional NWA Jim Crockett territory. And he did a lot of interesting things early in his life. He was a member of the U.S. Navy. He got to see the world at a young age. Obviously, he was into bodybuilding. And a lot of people don't know this either, but he was actually a professional hairdresser, a hairstylist. Before he got into the world of professional wrestling. Maybe that's why his perm looked so good back in the day. When he had the long hair and it was always frizzy, and, the perfect heavy metal Sunset Strip LA glam look that he used to have. And he may not have had the talent to back it up, but it wasn't really his fault. Not that he wasn't talented, but in 1991, when he was sort of recruited, where was he going to work? Like because all the territories were pretty much folding, unless you went to Portland or Memphis or where have you, or the Global Wrestling Federation in Texas. Even World Class Championship Wrestling had folded. So basically, not much. So what he did was he was trained by the great Boris Malenko, father of course, everybody knows the man of 1,000 holds, Dean Malenko. His famous father, Boris, trained Van Hammer along with a guy we all know a little well around here, talking dangerous Danny Spivey, otherwise known as Waylon Mercy. You want to give us your Waylon Mercy, David?
Oh, Waylon Mercy, live, live, you know, live. Waylon Mercy is here, and he's going to talk about a big old fashioned picnic. You know, the moms and the dads that bring the kids, and they got the hot dogs and the potato salad, and the kids getting on the parents' nerves, and they want to pack everything up, but then they're going to tell everyone what a good old fashioned picnic they had. You know what I mean? And Waylon Mercy knows how to throw a good picnic.
Wow, very stellar stuff. Well, thank you, David. That's a good example of dangerous Danny Spivey, otherwise known as the future dangerous Waylon Mercy. But back in 1991, he was in between gigs. He had been fired from the NWA, and he was going to go back to WCW. But in between, around then, when Dusty Rhodes became WCW Booker again, he helped Boris Malenko train Mark Hildreth, who in his very first match, he was called The Hammer, not Van Hammer. So like Greg Valentine, he was known as The Hammer. And it wasn't in a major promotion. He was working for a small territory called the North Georgia Wrestling Alliance. And do you know who was booking the North Georgia Wrestling Alliance?
No, I do not, baby. You tell us.
Well, you just got the answer. That's the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes.
Oh, Dusty Rhodes. Oh, the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. He's always ABG, always be genius, and baby.
You got it. And he was actually booking WCW simultaneously at this time. So after only one match, he was brought into the major leagues. Wrestling never used to work that way. But Dusty said, come on over, baby, after working a tag team match in the North Georgia Wrestling Alliance. This is, I would say, probably before Cody was, I don't know when Cody Rhodes was born, but he may not have even been born yet at this point. But it was probably around the time he was born or somewhere around there. And basically, Hammer worked a tag team match where he teamed up with a guy who The Rock borrowed a couple phrases from. I'm talking Iceman King Parsons. Now, how many of our viewers remember Iceman King Parsons?
Nobody, baby. Probably nobody.
Nobody?
Nobody, well, baby. Most of these people, they only know the modern stuff. They rely on us to educate and teach them about the Iceman King Parsons, baby.
Ah, well, then Parsons would say you're all a bunch of raggedy Rudy poots, which I know that The Rock borrowed. and Parsons actually has appeared, for those who watch. He's been on Dark Side of the Ring a couple times, at least once that I recall. So he's not gone yet. He's here. And he was a great regional star, but again, never really achieved the major mainstream status. But he did become, I guess you could say now, he'll live in fame or infamy as the Hammer, Van Hammer's first partner, as they defeated Billy Joe Travis, who was a great Memphis star, and a guy named Chris Germany. And that was Hammer's first match in the North Georgia Wrestling Alliance. And then he was brought up to WCW. And he certainly had a very interesting run the first couple of years. I'm not going to mention all of it. But I will say, of course, they pushed him really hard at the beginning, beat Terry Taylor in only like a minute and 8 seconds when Taylor was part of the York Foundation. He had some very good matches, of course, with Mick Foley, and he even credited his best match ever as the Falls Count Anywhere match at the Clash of the Champions, January 21st, 1992, in Topeka, Kansas, which was a crazy brawl that went outside the arena and was actually legitimately dangerous at one point. I think they wound up in a bull ring with like real bulls. It was really like high risk stuff. And that turned out to be kind of the match of Hammer's career. But he did, and after that, like he had a non-title win over Steve Austin, if you could believe it. When Steve Austin was the WCW television champion, Hammer pinned his shoulders on national television in a non-title match. Like, doesn't that sound crazy when you look back through the history books of pro wrestling, that the man who would become Stone Cold, the biggest, seller of merch in the industry and the standard bearer, would actually lay down for Van Hammer, the guy who was thought to be the polar opposite in terms of talent. of stunning Steve Austin. Like, that's not a super well-known fact, but it did happen. And it happened in front of the TV cameras too, which is really interesting. So that's a little known tidbit. One of the most famous matches that Van Hammer actually had in this period in his career was toward the end of his first run, when he got to be the lucky person to do the job for Sid Vicious, when the late Sid Udy returned to WCW, managed by Colonel Parker, and Van Hammer lost at Slamboree 93 in like 23 seconds or whatever, 32 seconds. You could tell his push was obviously not working out by this point. As great as Sid is, and I know they wanted to get him over really quickly, because Sid was supposed to get the world title shot that year against Vader at Starrcade, and you can tell us why that never happened. I think you know why.
Oh, that was largely in part. Wasn't that largely in part due to the scissor fight that took place on a European tour involving one Marty Lundy, Arn Anderson?
That's the one. That ruined everything. That's what allowed Starrcade to change and allowed for the Ric Flair versus Vader main event, because they were building to Vader versus Sid, which, although it sounds great on paper, obviously probably wasn't going to be a great match in a lot of ways, unless Vader was able to carry Sid. Sid could bring the charisma and the promo, but he couldn't really necessarily bring the great wrestling match. And it never happened, of course, because of that scissors fight, which was a horrible incident. One or both came close to dying. It was really serious. Thank goodness nobody died. And of course, Sid was the one blamed for it, not Arn. And Sid was fired, and in comes Ric Flair. And of course, that famous Starrcade where Flair beat Vader for the world title was, of course, in Charlotte, North Carolina, his backyard. And that was, well, basically because of what happened with Sid being ousted from the company. But when he came back, Van Hammer did a very quick loss to him. And Van Hammer, I guess, could see the writing on the wall. And when WCW decided that summer to go to, actually, before I talk about the summer of '93, there was another crazy story where Van Hammer was wrestling Ravishing Rick Rude. I think it was on WCW Saturday Night, and Rude accidentally broke his nose. Now, this wouldn't be news except for the fact, yes, Van Hammer is resilient. He was a great physical specimen. He not only finished the match, instead of going on the injured list, he decided backstage that he was going to do something about it. So he actually shoved a Sharpie up his nose and smashed his nose back into place and continued wrestling on the road after that. Isn't that crazy?
That is a story I've never heard before. So, folks, if you suffer from a broken nose, there's nothing a Sharpie won't do to take care of that.
Yeah, especially if you're determined. Well, then they had guaranteed contract. I don't know. Maybe he wouldn't have lost money, but maybe it was a matter of pride or whatever. But that's why he missed that Clash of the Champions where Cactus Jack Mick Foley was turned babyface. Van Hammer was supposed to be in that Thunderdome tag team match with Sting and Paul Orndorff, and I think Brian Pillman? No, that wasn't Brian Pillman. It was Sting. I think Barry Windham was in it. Anyway, so Van Hammer missed it because 10 days before that, he went to finally have the surgery to correct his broken nose. Anyway, fast forward to summer of '93. Hammer is losing all the time, and WCW is embarking on a new adventure by going to the Disney MGM studios to start those marathon tapings for WCW Worldwide. Of course, hosted, I believe, by Jesse the Body Ventura and Tony Schiavone, and they became infamous tapings because in a time when kayfabe was still alive to some degree, they gave away like title changes months in advance, and it didn't work out anyway because if somebody got injured or left the company, they were still on TV, and that's actually what happened to Van Hammer. Van Hammer wrestled his last match on July 11th, 1993, but he was on WCW television because of these tapings all the way until November. He did wrestle, actually, these tapings, and that kept him on TV for 3 months. 3 months, more than that, 4 months, 5 months after he had already departed the company. That's how weird WCW is. Vince McMahon would never allow such a thing. The moment in those days you left, you didn't exist anymore, but not at good old WCW. And And many people may not remember this either, but Van Hammer actually went on to have a tryout with the WWF in the summer of 1993, and not too far from here geographically, because WWF had come for a series of Superstars and Challenge tapings. Now, you want to remember that at this time, Monday Night Raw in its infancy was being shot in New York City at the Manhattan Center. So they were really trying to stay around that area, like for shows that were TV tapings, because Monday they did a lot of live tapings in those days for Raw and what have you. So they had a couple of TV tapings in Utica, New York, and Plattsburgh, New York, which Montrealers obviously know very well, respectively. And Van Hammer came to both of those shows to try out for the WWF. I'm guessing you wouldn't remember that, David.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
I know. I learned some. You see, this is the thing. I learn something new from you every single time we go live.
Well, thank you, David. Likewise. So good stuff, and prepare to learn some more, because the man, they didn't change his name, which is unusual enough. They didn't give him a WWF name or some new name in case they liked him. They let him wrestle as Van Hammer. And what was weird is they let him wrestle, or they made him wrestle as a heel the first night, but the second night they had him wrestle as a babyface. So it was really weird. On the first night, he was a heel, and he actually, did he lose or did he win? Let me think for a second. He actually lost to none other than the late Mike Jones, a.k.a. Virgil. Virgil defeated Van Hammer in Van Hammer's first tryout match in Utica, New York that night. So how's that for interesting? Virgil over...
Is that on YouTube?
I've never saw it. It would have to be under the dark match category, so I don't think it had been released anywhere, but it could change, now that Van Hammer's gone. They made WWF. It's the only footage they have of him aside from the WCW footage, which they own the library of. So I've never seen it on YouTube.
Doing a quick search.
Oh, okay.
Doing a quick search. No. In the search bar, I am not getting any such results of what you speak of, but I'm not calling you a liar. No, believe you me, I ain't calling you a liar. It's just...
Well, the dark match, though, you wouldn't expect it necessarily to be available unless somebody filmed it with a fan cam or WWE released it somewhere. Yeah, no, of course not. I understand. And the next night, though, they switched him, and he actually worked as a babyface, but he again lost his match. This time, as a babyface, he lost to Damien Demento, who we all remember as the Northeast Independent.
Of your mind.
Yeah. That's right, and that's a guy, they did change his name from Mondo Clean to Damien Demento for his run. As Mondo Clean, he was excellent. He was fearsome. He was really something, and that's what got him signed, I guess. But aside from his political connections to people in the organization. But on this night, Van Hammer was not, well, they weren't going to put him over, I guess. Certainly not against one of their own talents. So that's it. Damien Demento beat Van Hammer. Van Hammer was a face, and the night before he was a heel, and unfortunately the late Virgil got to be the one pinning, or fortunately for Virgil, he got to be the one pinning Van Hammer's shoulders to the mat. But that was then, and basically what would happen later on is the next year, Van Hammer would be brought back to WCW, still basically doing the same gimmick, and he would come back on an episode of Saturday Night, and he would work against the late, great Dirty Dick Slater, who I believe was being managed by Colonel Parker, perhaps at this time. And then his second run began, and eventually he evolved in 1997 to become a member of the Flock. But something I always remember in a happy way about Van Hammer is I loved the idea. It did not last long. They were going to do a heavy metal versus heavy metal feud. Because what happened is that I think it was at that Clash of the Champions where he wrestled Foley in the Falls Count Anywhere. They had a live band playing, and one of the band members was heavy metal musician, who actually was a legitimate heavy metal musician. We may want to mention, as we mentioned on our previous last episode together, that Van Hammer did not play the guitar for real, never played the guitar. In fact, he gave his guitar to Man Mountain Rock, a.k.a. Max Payne, a.k.a. Daryl Peterson, who legitimately was a rock musician, Well, they had a legitimate rock musician there who was also an independent wrestling talent in the South, and his name, appropriately enough, was J.T. Southern. And they were going to pit heavy metal musician versus heavy metal musician, and they started brawling. I think it was at that Clash, if I'm not mistaken. And they had a short-lived feud that I felt they could have done a lot more with. J.T. Southern had a great look too. Maybe he wasn't an established name either, but I was excited at the prospect of Van Hammer versus JT Southern, glam metal versus glam metal, or heavy metal versus heavy metal. And Southern was a legitimate musician, is maybe, if he's, I hope he's still alive, a legitimate musician, but it was never meant to be. But that one really kind of impressed me. I like that one, but didn't last very long. So. And the rest of Mark Hildreth, aka Van Hammer's life, has been well publicized, so I'm not going to continue past the mid 90s, but that's the story of this. And I forgot one of the best stories. I don't know if this was ever brought up on our show. Do you remember us ever talking about, or are you aware of the story of Diamond Dallas Page's Christmas party that Van Hammer attended?
No, I do not recall. But now that we are in July and there is Christmas in July, so no time like the present to bring up a Christmas story in the month of July.
Okay. Well, it turns out that Van Hammer wasn't loved by all of his WCW cohorts. A lot of them were jealous because he got a very nice contract and he never did much in wrestling before. He didn't pay any dues. He just happened to look fantastic and be, in the good books of Dusty Rhodes, and he was friends with Mark Merrow. They actually had their tryout match together, I believe, and they trained together in WCW. And Merrow and Hammer, actually, Mark Merrow told a good story that he and Hammer lived together during this period. And let's just say they lived very different lifestyles. And Mark Merrow came home one day and only to find the police going through their shared apartment. And Merrow was really, I don't know if you know this story, but he was really shocked by all these police. And, he's sharing an apartment with Merrow and with Hammer. And Mark Merrow comes home and there's cops everywhere tearing apart the apartment. And when they saw Merrow walk in, they all pulled their guns on him and said, hands up, freeze, freeze. And Mark Merrow, who was new to the business at this time, was scared out of his mind. And Mark Merrow is no slouch when it comes to toughness. He's a former Golden Gloves boxing champion, but he's also a law-abiding citizen, and he was really freaked out. It turns out that there were rumors that Hammer may have been dealing drugs or something, and they were searching his apartment, their shared apartment, for drugs, and Merrow had no idea about it, and he came home, and all of a sudden, like 15 police officers are aiming their guns at him. So that's not the story I was going to tell, but that's a cute little aside that Merrow can laugh about it this day. I don't know if you were aware of that one.
I was not, but I can just imagine. Dusty Rhodes saying, "Oh, baby, like you got your. They go after Little Richard, mama.
Exactly.
You don't know what you got going on in your apartment, baby, but you probably got something because you look like Little Richard."
That could very well be. That's right. And a big favorite of Dusty Rhodes, who created that character, and etc. So he, do you know that Dusty Rhodes is funny? He named Mark Miro Johnny B. Bad, or allowed Mark to be called that, because Dusty Rhodes used to go around to bars in the days before karaoke, I'm guessing, used to love to go up with the band, and there was one song he would sing every night, and that was Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry. He would grab the mic and
oh boy.
Yeah, it's he didn't need a muffler for that one, I don't think, but
no muffler for karaoke, baby. No muffler. But when when the American Dream was wrestling, baby, he had to put the muffler, and sometimes it would fall out.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think you may remember Dusty singing before his in the setup to his match with the Honky Tonk Man at SummerSlam '89. Do you remember Dusty singing or recording a music video to compete with the Honky Tonk Man's video? I think it was Johnny Be Good. Actually. I think it may have been Johnny Be Good
that I can recall, but I will look it up and see if that rings true.
Okay. Well, I mean, it definitely. I mean, I saw it multiple times. I mean, not in recent years, but it definitely happened. But I might be right that he actually was singing. John, the only song he knew how to sing, well, maybe apparently was, he did. Maybe he could carry a tune easily with that song, and whatever other multitude of songs he liked, he wasn't able to really do. But anyway, when you're ready, I'll go back to the Christmas Diamond Dallas Page story. So.
Well, let's get back to it. Let's not get into any more sidebars. Let's pivot back to the story.
Okay, so this is my last Van Hammer story. Rather hilarious, but unfortunate. Not everybody was happy working with Hammer because even if he was a nice guy, he was getting a crazy break, no experience. He was being paid more than a bunch of his colleagues, and he was given all this preferential treatment. And some of the old school guys who came up the hard way did not appreciate this. So the story goes, now it's been disputed in some ways exactly how it happened, but it went something like this. Everybody was gathered at Diamond Dallas Page's, all the WCW crew and the talent were gathered. Diamond Dallas Page threw a Christmas party. It was either the Christmas of 92 or 93, I'm guessing. It would have had to be definitely wasn't 91 because Steven Regal, aka William Regal, showed up and he wasn't there in WCW 91 yet. He had just come around December 92, January 93. So it might have been the year after. Anyway, he gets there, I think, later than a bunch of the others. And he's saying hi to everybody, shaking his hand. They almost have a receiving line like you'd see at a wedding. So Regal is working his way down the line, saying hi, shaking hands. But when he gets to Van Hammer, without even any hesitation or provocation, he gives Hammer a nasty headbutt and knocks him out without any words exchanged between the two, right in the middle of Diamond Dallas Page's house. Like, that's how he says hi to him at the party because he can't stand him, bro. Regal came up fighting in tough man contests and carnivals in England and the bare knuckles, and he really earned it the hard way. And here's this guy who's like clueless about wrestling technique and whatever, and just because he looks fantastic and doesn't even play guitar legitimately, and he looks like $1 million, but he may not even know what he's doing really for somebody that new or in the business, whatever. So like Regal and him were like oil and water apparently. And if the story is exactly accurate, Regal just walks up to him, headbutts him, knocks him out, leaves him on the floor, and continues enjoying the party. Like that's his way of saying hi, Van Hammer. He just headbutts him into unconscious. And of course, and Hammer can't do anything about it. Regal is about 80 times tougher in real life than Van Hammer is, so it's really funny actually. But anyway, it's too bad because he really was a nice guy. I know he had legal trouble later in his life and made some poor choices, but he was generally thought to be a very loyal friend, a good guy, and it was very sad to see him pass away at the age of 65. And it's too young, when you think, well, God, I mean, the guy looked like a Greek god. He was chiseled from stone. He did great things in his life early on, like being in part of the U.S. Navy, and he did different professions, and it's sad, just ultimately sad. But he lived a very colorful life while it lasted, for sure. And he got to live a dream. Like, how many people would pretty much get signed off the street? Well, maybe now, I don't know. But back then, how many people would get signed off the street to work for a major wrestling company with more money than he's seen in a year, and making more than a bunch of his colleagues who may have had 15 to 20 years experience behind them and making a lot less. So like, he really did live his dream and he was grateful for it. And he was a good natured guy. So rest in peace, Mark Ty Hildreth, AKA the Hammer, AKA Van Hammer. So.
Yes. May his memory forever be a blessing. I mean, the guy looked like, he looked like Sammy Hagar. I mean, a buffer, muscular-looking Sammy Hagar.
Absolutely, exactly. And whether there was really much steak under the sizzle, that's up for debate. But there was a lot of, I guess you could say, it was implied that he did improve a lot toward the end of his career. He got better. By then, it didn't really matter because they weren't going to push him. But after the Ravens flock and stuff, when he was, he started to really improve. It was a little too late, but in the last years of his career, he did get to be a much better worker. And that match with Cactus Jack always lives on as a classic. I mean, he admitted himself that Mick Foley carried him to that. I mean, he had no idea what he was doing. He let the great Mick Foley take the lead for that one, but it turned out to be Van Hammer's most famous match. So good for him. And WWF passed on him, unfortunately, but whatever. Well, unfortunately or fortunately, it depends how you look at it. But actually, if it was 93 at that Christmas party, if Van Hammer had been hired by the WWF, that great story of Steve Regal headbutting him into unconsciousness may never have happened. So anyway, rest in peace, sir. So that's the most famous of the four guys I was going to talk about. I'll try not to make the other three as long, but Van Hammer is such an interesting story that it was really hard and to skip a lot of this stuff because, a lot of us have fond memories of WCW even before the Monday Night Wars during the Jim Herd and Bill Watts era. Even Bill Watts tried to push him, I heard. Bill Watts, of all people, didn't hate him, even though he wasn't a legitimate athlete, and Bill Watts liked legitimate athletes. He thought, we have a guy that looks like this. He's been around for a while. We should do something with him. And that's why I think he was starting to get wins over Steve Austin. That might have been before Watts, but he was battling Rick Rude, who was supposed to go on and fight for the world title at Starrcade 92. And Van Hammer made it to the finals of Battle Bowl at Starrcade 92. So when Watts was there, and he put him in the Thunderdome cage match, but Hammer took off to have his nose surgery. So, one thing to give Bill Watts credit for, which we don't do very often on this show for various reasons, is he actually tried to push Hammer, of all people, which is the antithesis of the type of guys that Bill Watts liked to push at the time, right? Or at any time during his years as a promoter and stuff. So very interesting, very interesting. So Hammer had appeal, and now he's gone. Shall I go on to some of the others?
Yes, we got at least three more to talk about, and
we do, and they won't be as long, but
got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, at least in terms of the quality of amazing talent here. Now you could say the actual ring talent quality goes up big time. Phil Hickerson, who I'm going to talk about next, was one of the greatest to put on a pair of tights, but most people have no idea who he is because he never wrestled for WWF. He only wrestled briefly for the NWA when they would do joint shows like at the Great American Bash, and they would bring in some of the smaller promotions. So Phil Hickerson had a tiny bit of the national spotlight, but it wasn't major. A lot of more, I don't know if I should say modern fans, but I'll say 90s fans remember Phil Hickerson for his absolutely groundbreaking, so bad it's good gimmick, like the ultimate in stupid gimmicks, but Phil Hickerson was so good that he got it over. We've seen guys in wrestling like that, right, David, who are given something so ridiculous to do, if you even want to say Dusty Rhodes and the Polka Dots, but Dusty is so good at what he did, he actually got it over, and it didn't shame him or his legacy. It's actually part of his legacy because Dusty was so good at what he did, and Phil Hickerson was not that different. Phil Hickerson had a physique that was actually similar to Dusty Rhodes, but he had a much meaner demeanor to him, and he was perfect for Memphis wrestling and all that stuff because he was a mean looking guy. He looked like a trucker, and a guy a nasty dude you can meet at a truck stop in the southern states who was just who loved insulting people and starting fights in bars, and he played that role to the hilt. I mean, in later years he became a successful radio DJ for 20 years in Jackson, Tennessee, where he's from. But his wrestling career is absolutely astonishing, and the part of it that's in the 70s doesn't really exist that much on video because that's hard stuff to get a hold of. And he had a couple of amazing tag team runs in the 70s, and it's very interesting that Dennis Condrey, who we talked about a few months ago passing away, of course one half of one of the main incarnations of the Midnight Express, had one of wrestling's greatest tag team runs with none other than Phil Hickerson, who died 2 months to the day after Dennis Condrey died. But a lot of people don't remember the Hickerson Condrey team because there's not much video that exists of them in action. The only way to learn how great Hickerson and Condrey were to hear stories from either fans or wrestling journalists or whoever, or wrestlers, telling shoot stories about how great they were because they saw it live or they saw it on TV at that time. And the only other way is in print, like by reading old wrestling magazines or wrestling blogs who may talk about it or whatever. Hickerson and Condrey were, if you had to list the greatest 10 tag teams of all time, at least starting in the 1970s to today, and you're of course going to put the Road Warriors, at least one version of the Midnight Express, the Rock and Roll Express, the British Bulldogs, the Hart Foundation Demolition, etc., you would not be crazy if you knew what you're talking about to put Hickerson and Condrey on that list, because they were both that good. Condrey was super underrated, even by himself. Hickerson was super underrated by himself. Together, they were incredible, and they also had one of the craziest gimmicks that you could ever imagine, because the year they got together was 1975. Now, Hickerson's first run was basically as a tag team partner of a guy called Al Green, not the R&B musician, the soul musician that many people think of when they hear Al Green, and not even the guy who I believe was Kevin Nash's tag team partner in the Master Blasters early in his WCW career, but I speak instead of the tag team partner of Don Green. Don Green and Al Green were like the second most famous Memphis tag team of all time, behind the Fabulous Fargo brothers, which is who the Fabulous ones, Stan Lane and Steve Kern, modeled their gimmick after. But Hickerson, what had happened was Don and Al Green were very successful, I think, working for Nick Goulas in the Memphis part of that territory. And unfortunately, Don Green had a major alcohol problem and couldn't wrestle anymore in that promotion, but they needed to do something with Al Green. And Phil Hickerson had been there for a year or two or whatever. They said, let's put him with Phil. And they were actually a really good team. And Phil Hickerson showed talent right away. Like, some people actually compared Phil Hickerson to this new guy. You could tell me about him because I don't know much about him. Who is this Mason Rook guy that I keep hearing about?
Mason Rook.
I'm not saying I hear good things.
I keep hearing about the name.
Yeah.
I keep hearing about the name.
Right.
I hear about the name, but do I? Oh, well, he's a big boy. I mean, he's a big boy, and the only reason I know this Mason Rook is because a lot of trolls and a lot of haters on social media were comparing him to Piper Niven or Dewdrop, who is also another plus-size wrestler.
Okay, well, that's really... Wow, let's just say that it's bad enough when you do it to a guy, but to do that to a woman, that's really shameful. But anyway, whatever. I mean, who cares what they look like? If they're talented, fine, and whether it's good, bad, indifferent. Well, okay, so you know what? I'll put it this way. They disliked Phil Hickerson for the same reason the trolls... I mean, they didn't dislike him. They accused him of not being what they thought a wrestler should look like, for the same reason that they're currently criticizing Mason Rook. For the same reason, on the opposite end, they criticize Sami Zayn for the same thing. He doesn't have muscle definition much. He doesn't matter if he's one of the most talented wrestlers in the world, whatever. He doesn't look like he should be a wrestler based on the traditional definition of what a wrestler, quote unquote, should look like according to the stereotype. So Phil Hickerson was that guy. And they made fun of him a bunch of times for it too. But the worst time, I don't know if you ever heard about this, is when, of all people, Sting and the Ultimate Warrior tried to make fun of Phil Hickerson. But I don't know if you know the story, but I'll tell it later a little bit because I'm getting ahead of myself. Do you know that story, by the way?
No, I don't. So chat us up when the time is right to tell the story.
Okay, so Hickerson does his team with Al Green. It's pretty great. Gets together with Dennis Condrey. It's absolutely incredible. And just to get more heat from the fans, and Hickerson already had a lot of heat. Because it was 1975 and America's bicentennial anniversary was coming up, they decided to get bleach blonde hair, the craziest outfits you've ever seen, and call themselves the Bicentennial Kings. And this was infuriating to the fans because, first of all, they were heels, so they were kind of mocking America, they felt. They also played up all the homophobic stereotypes and would, whenever they were in trouble, like one of them would run to the corner and hug their partner, and the partner would sue the other guy's boo-boo. And the rabid fans in the South were not having this. It was like a really bad sort of like Billy Idol or Sex Pistols impression, but more of a glam thing. And it was really, the Memphis crowd was not ready for it. So I should mention that when Hickerson teamed with Al Green, they were sent away pretty quickly, I believe, to the Jerry Jarrett side of that territory. Of course, in 1977, Jerry Jarrett, the father of the guy they're doing The Dark Side of the Ring this week.
Yeah, well, it's funny that, sorry to interrupt you, but it's funny that tonight is the season premiere, 2-hour season premiere. And it's going to be there's going to be 3 episodes dedicated to Jeff Jarrett's time, or not just Jeff Jarrett, but TNA wrestling as a whole. So the first 2 episodes are going to air tonight, and the third and final part of said trilogy is going to air next week. And it's so funny that we go live tonight as we're bringing it up. Anyway,
well, that's right.
Back to your story.
Thank you, David. I mean, you can't talk about Phil Hickerson without talking about Jerry Jarrett, and he was there when Jeff Jarrett debuted in the mid '80s. I mean, Phil Hickerson was a huge part of Memphis wrestling. So here they are, the Bicentennial Kings in the mid '70s. Hickerson could do anything. He even managed to turn babyface a few times, and as much as the crowd hated him, they loved him when he decided to turn his mean demeanor toward the heels instead of the baby faces. But at this time, he was all the way heel. Bicentennial Kings, absolutely magnificent. Then what happened is he continued in the late 70s, Hickerson doing his thing, but unfortunately, around 1979 or so, he suffered a really, really bad knee injury, and it was so bad he had to take about 5 years off of wrestling full time, and he wasn't seen that much. So imagine you're in the prime of your career. It's happened to other wrestlers too. But keep in mind, this is a time when if you don't wrestle, you don't make money. No one's going to cover your medical expenses. There's no GoFundMe either. So basically, you're on your own. You better find something to do with your life because you weren't making much money in Memphis anyway. So now you can't even work. So Hickerson had to basically leave the wrestling business more or less for like 5 years. And then he was amazing. Before I go further, I don't know what Mason Rook can do. I know what Piper Niven can do. I've seen her. Hickerson was very deceptive for his size. He could do all kinds of weird aerial maneuvers. He was agile as anything. He was just a gifted wrestler who did not look the part by any stretch of the imagination. And he was a gifted character too. Like, he had such high octane personality. It's so sad that WWE has totally pushed aside this guy as a forgotten entity, because Phil Hickerson, there's a lot of his 80s stuff that you could see online, but all the stuff with the Bicentennial Kings, very, very little, unfortunately, because the videos were not kept in that era. So it is too bad. But WWE kind of, because he never made it to not really, to the major leagues, swept under the rug. So he comes back in the mid 80s, this is 85 or so, and he has a really amazing rest of the 1980s. And here's where I'm going to get into the story with Sting and the Ultimate Warrior. So Sting and the Warrior starting out as the Freedom Fighters before they became the Blade Runners. And even before that, they were just called Steve and Jim. I think they actually went by their real first names. And they come into Memphis, and the reason they came into Memphis was because nobody else really wanted to take a look at them. They were straight out of the California wrestling school, quote unquote, of Rick Bassman, who was putting together Power Team USA, a group of bodybuilders that were going to invade the wrestling world. And he had like 5 or 6 of them. two of which became really famous, being Steve Sting Borden and, of course, Jim, the Ultimate Warrior / Dingo Warrior Hellwig. Another fairly famous member of Power Team USA was Dave Shelton, who wrestled as the Angel of Death and then later in WCW as one half of the Russian Assassins. But of course, he wasn't as famous in Texas. He was great and stuff, but Sting and Warrior obviously are and were who they are and were. But Sting and Warrior are so rookie-like when they come into Memphis, the first territory, willing to give them a chance. They are really, really bad. Once they, in interviews, you could argue, okay, Hellwig had an arrogant way about him. Steve Borden was shyer and easier to get along with, but once they got in the ring, they were absolutely terrible. But they figure that character work and interviews are probably going to be their key to success. And the Warrior, Jim Hellwig, was a lot bigger here than he would be when he made it to the national spotlight. He was coming right off winning like Mr. Georgia and all those Mr. Universe type contests, and he was jacked to the gills. And he came in there really arrogant with Sting and thought they were, God's gift to wrestling, when in fact that the other people in the territory, from Hickerson to Jerry Lawler to Dutch Mantell, etc., were like miles ahead of them. But they decided they were going to come in and start to make a name for themselves by dissing the established veterans in the territory. So what they did is they said, this is all Warrior, because I don't even think Sting spoke too much. Warrior basically said that because they look so great, they're going to rid this territory of all the, ugly, overweight wrestlers that really shouldn't be in a ring compared to them. And they specifically named Jerry the King Lawler, who wasn't really overweight, but he was obviously not a bodybuilder. And the other one they named was the man in question, Phil Hickerson. And the angle was that Hickerson did not really take too kindly to this. And he came out and he basically gave one of the most amazing promos. And especially when you look back in history on who the Ultimate Warrior became and who Sting became, because Warrior's at the mic there. It wasn't called Warrior then. I guess he was called Blade or whatever he was called. And he was just dissing, ripping into Lawler and Hickerson. Hickerson comes out and Hickerson said, because Warrior's saying, well, you never saw the inside of a gym. You're a loser. We could beat you with one arm tied behind our back type of thing. And Hickerson said, and even Lance Russell, the babyface announcer, said, hey, let's Mr. Hellwig here, calm down. I mean, I may not like Phil Hickerson personally because he does dastardly things, but the man is an accomplished wrestler. He's won titles up and down the coast. Like, watch your mouth. Warrior wouldn't shut his mouth. I mean, this almost is like a shoot, basically, based on who Jim Hellwig was. And Hickerson comes out. He says, who the hell do you think you are talking about me that way? He said, I had nothing against you guys. I even tried to help you when you got here. But here you are telling me I don't go to a gym and I'm overweight and I suck. Like who in the world do you think you are? I could whip you so easily. It's not even funny. And Warrior's like, yeah, you really think you could, type of thing. And Hickerson's like, look, I got all the talent I need. The only thing you two guys are talented at is dropping your britches and sticking steroids in your booty. That's what he actually said. The only thing Sting and Warrior were good for was shooting up with steroids. They had no idea how to wrestle, and they actually got away with saying something that was so taboo. I mean, it wasn't WWF, it wasn't NWA, it was Memphis. But here he is, like, yeah, you guys shoot steroids up. That's the only thing you know how to do. You can't fight. You're going to probably be wrestling on the second or fourth match for the rest of your life. And Warrior's like, yeah, you think so? And you better shut up. And Hickerson's like, yeah, let's get in the ring right now. And he's taking off his shirt and he says, I'm going to destroy you guys. And it was a really exciting angle, and especially considering who Sting and Warrior would later become. It was, well, historically speaking, it's really something. And the fact that they openly talked about steroids in those days on the wrestling shows that weren't the major leagues was really fascinating too, because, I mean, Warrior was huge. He was bigger than he was there than even in the WWF. Are you still with us, David? I haven't heard from you.
Oh, I'm still with you, but I'm listening to your story. I'm not cutting you off or interrupting you. Like I've been I've done in the past and I've had complaints about. So I'm letting you tell a story.
Oh, well, no problem. I just because of the solo screen, I just wanted to make sure you were still there. That's all.
Oh, I'm still here. I'm still here, but the spot, like I said, the spotlight is on you.
Thank you.
I'll share the spotlight from time to time, but like I said, I need to improve my lighting because my lighting as such is terrible right now. And like I said, I look like I'm in the witness protection program, and you are very well lit.
Well, I hope in the literal sense, yes. And you could be Dark Shadow David. I don't mind, but sure, why not? Good. Okay. So yeah, good to know you're there. And I never considered you as being incredibly interruptive, but if viewers just want me to tell a story with no interludes, then good with me too. So anyway, so yeah, so Hickerson made a bunch of headlines. That was at the end of '85, and it's something. The next couple of years, he would, I forgot to say actually, when he was with the Bicentennial Kings, you know how many times they won the AWA Mid Southern Tag Team titles? Back in a day when titles didn't always change hands as much as today?
No idea. Tell us.
Well, they held other ones too, but for that particular title, they were nine-time tag team champions. But that's how good they were. Like, yes, they lost it 8 times, but they won.
I was gonna say that. I was gonna say that, but you beat me to it, Alan.
Yeah, it's fine, but they always went back to it. Now, as the years went on, when you get into '87 and '88, there's some interesting talent coming into Memphis in the Continental Wrestling Association, or Championship Wrestling Association, the CWA as it was then known, because you had Max Payne coming in, who Man Mountain Rock. You had Jarrett, of course, Jeff Jarrett had started by then. You had Mick Foley, who I was talking about before. And you even had a young Scott Steiner, who was coming fresh from the Dick the Bruiser WWA territory in Indianapolis, coming into Memphis and having his first important run. And he challenged Phil Hickerson for the CWA Heavyweight Championship, which I guess I should mention Hickerson held a number of times as well. This is later than when he was with the Bicentennial Kings. So Hickerson also was a successful singles champion, and Scott Steiner and him had a very interesting feud. Again, you had Scott Steiner, the muscle man, way before he was the big bad booty daddy, Big Papa Pump, way before he was part of the Steiner brothers. But this was his formative years. And Phil Hickerson, I'm sure if you went to Scott Steiner, he'd probably have good things to say about cutting his teeth working with the great Phil Hickerson. The last time that Phil Hickerson was the CWA champion, I believe, was in November of 1988 when he lost that title to none other than current podcaster Dirty Dutch Mantell. I'm assuming our viewers are somewhat familiar with Dutch. I know you are.
Oh, I am. I certainly am. And maybe most of our viewers are, because if they subscribe just like I do to James Romero's podcasting series, I don't know if this has been going on. It's been a while, but Storytime with Dutch is always one of my favorite things to watch, whether it's in clips or in long form.
Absolutely. And, Dutch, again, is another kind of understated hero of the wrestling business who only had limited success in the WWF and WCW, but his success in the territory system, my God, I guess you can say in TNA was, or whatever, was it TNA that he was the booker and all that? I don't know. But
yes, Dutch was a booker in TNA wrestling, and I'm not sure if he's one of the guests that's going to be featured on what's going down tonight into next week. But yes, he was one of the bookers, and he was also one of the primary bookers at one time for World Wrestling Council in Puerto Rico, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I was just going to say that. So he had amazing success doing that in Puerto Rico and the World Wrestling Council. He had huge runs in Memphis and Continental. He served as an announcer in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. In WCW, he did a lot of different things. He was a commentator. Of course, he was a wrestler. He was some fans, the cult fans, remember him as 1/3 of the Desperados. That crazy three-man team that never did anything, but their vignettes are still considered pretty legendary. And Dutch Mantell himself has said they were actually going to be given a television pilot on one of the Turner stations to take their characters as the Desperados and turn it into a sitcom or something, which is a crazy story. But that's it. So Dutch has cult status, and now he's more mainstream because of TNA, because of the podcast and stuff. But basically, it's him too. Like, he had runs in WWF as a manager and in WCW as a commentator and a wrestler. But he's also kind of an unsung hero a little bit. But there's a lot of stuff available about him. Phil Hickerson, his '80s stuff is. But not his '70s stuff. His '70s stuff, he was absolutely incredible. His '80s stuff is really good too, but he's starting to get older at this point. So, as I was saying, feuding with Scott Steiner, dropping the title to Dutch Mantell, and then comes the craziest transformation in wrestling this side of the one-man gang, becoming Akeem the African Dream. And what I'm talking about is in late '88 and early '89, Hickerson went outside. He never really left the Tennessee and Georgia area. Like, he was always wrestling in those areas. He didn't really go outside, so he was never much in the major leagues. Once in a while he would wrestle, like I think in Louisiana he wrestled at the Big Great American Bash, one of the shows at the Superdome, and he was a crazy baby face then. And this is also incredible because he actually became a role model to the African American community, if you could believe it, during this period in his career. He had a brief run where he was particularly trying to win over the African American fans. It's not like today where everybody of mixed backgrounds is like back then. Like Kevin Sullivan, may he rest in peace, used to say, if you could win over the black crowd, because they don't go for the gobbledygooker stuff, like, then you got something, because that crowd only identified with you if you were really legit and you seemed like you meant it. And Phil Hickerson, who looks like the biggest bigoted redneck you would ever want to meet, actually turns babyface and decides he's going to dress in a full tuxedo. He's the last guy you'd think would be wearing a tuxedo. He always looked like a disheveled trucker, and basically puts on a top hat and comes dancing out to the ring to the song Party Train by the Gap Band. And all the African-American fans in Louisiana, there were a lot of African-American fans of wrestling in Louisiana, they go absolutely crazy. And some of the wrestlers on the card didn't even know who he was. It's like, who is this guy? And he looks like a real backwoods type of, narrow-minded individual, and all the black fans are getting excited because Hickerson could do anything. He was just so amazing. And like I said, a real crime that he's undervalued to this day. I mean, he made the news because he died, basically, but he wouldn't have made the news otherwise. And anyway, so now we fast forward to 1989. Jerry Jarrett is buying over World Class Wrestling, and it's becoming the USWA during that year. And Phil Hickerson actually goes on a tour of Japan, which is, again, it seems like an odd fit, but Hickerson is so talented. He's well liked, not only by the fans, but by the promoters. And then he sort of gets this idea. He says, what if I bring this sort of tour of Japan back into my wrestling career? Because he was getting older at this point. He knew his time was kind of limited, being a major name in the regional major name in the territories. And he goes and does the most bizarre, absurd, but yet absolutely amazing thing. He gets reborn as a man from Tennessee who becomes Japanese. The redneck trucker guy has an awakening because he hits his head or something while he's in Japan, and he remembers in a past life that he was actually a Japanese man, and transforms from Phil Hickerson to P.Y. Chuhai, the Japanese philosopher who borrows quotes from Confucius and gives Japanese wisdom to the American people in Texas and Tennessee. And it was so absurd and over the top. But Phil Hickerson is so good, he actually gets it over. And every time he gets like stuck on an interview, he would sort of have like this brain fog, and he would say, "Oh, wait a minute." He says, "I'm getting a message from my ancestors." And then he says, "In the words of the great P.Y. Chuhai," and he would just spout some nonsense that was taken as mystical. Like, the guy was amazing. And where did he get the name P.Y. Chuhai, you might ask? He got the name P.Y. Chuhai because his manager, the Japanese, well, I think he was actually Hawaiian, the guy they portrayed as a Japanese wrestler and later manager, his manager, Tojo Yamamoto, basically used to wrestle in the Crockett Mid-Atlantic area as a character called P.Y. Chung. So basically what Phil Hickerson did was take the P.Y. part from P.Y. Chung and turn Chung into Chuhai, which is actually, I believe, a form of Japanese alcohol of some sort. And he created this character that was incredible and people thought it would fail because it was so stupid. I mean, everybody knew it was Phil Hickerson. Everybody knew he wasn't Japanese, but he painted his face and it would never fly today. It's really politically incorrect, but he did it so well that he actually had a last run where he was crazy over because he became this P.Y. Chuhai character. And I can remember in 1989 watching that. I was like, as bad as the Akeem thing was, you would never see something like this in the WWF WCW did kind of go into that territory, but not as well as this. I mean, because they had the uber talented Phil Hickerson doing it. It was really good. Like it was so bad it was good. Like, let's put it that way. Only Hickerson probably could have done this to make you believe he's the Japanese dude from Tennessee, and it was just over the top. And that basically was the final cap just about on Hickerson's career. He wrestled for a few more years, but then he transitioned into radio. He was a lot older, and his body had certainly taken enough abuse. He moved very well for a man his size, and rest in peace, Phil Hickerson. At least he made it to 79. The other three died the other three did not die so young. Barry Blaustein, who I'm not going to talk about tonight, died young. Obviously, Van Hammer died young. Phil Hickerson, not as young, 79, but it's so sad that unlike Van Hammer, his story is not super well known. He was great. So rest in peace, Phil Hickerson.
What can I say? Any age is a young age to die. It doesn't matter how old you are. I want to make that perfectly clear.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. But if you can live 80, 85 years, it's better than living 50, probably, unless you pack so much living into that 50 that maybe you have a more interesting life in 50 but still, though, I mean, yeah, okay. But I mean, in Van Hammer's case, it was for sure too young. And in the next case I'm going to talk about, it was also for sure too young. So if you're okay with it, we're going to move from Phil Hickerson to the golden boy, Jerry Gray.
Yes, let's. And right. I do have to say this, after the story you just told us, when it comes to Phil Hickerson, I have to say something Jerry Jarrett used to always say randomly when he didn't understand something.
Yeah, good one. Very good. You're right. That's a great impression of the late Jerry Jarrett. But yeah, I guess in a kayfabe way he would say that in this case. But let's face it, he okayed it, and in a promotion that he owned was running. So he must have trusted Phil Hickerson. But you're right. Well, that's right, because I don't know if P.Y. Chuhai specialized in Japanese chicken salad, but I'm sure Jerry Jarrett had his fun with that.
Well, his chicken salad, the late Jerry Jarrett's chicken salad recipe is apparently an ancient Chinese secret. So we're not going to, let's not get into ethnicities, and let's just move on.
Okay. So now we go to the golden boy, Jerry Gray, and you also talk about a really unsung hero of wrestling. He's even more unsung in some ways than Hickerson was, because at least Hickerson could be seen on Channel 5 Memphis Wrestling Television from week to week. But Jerry Gray was kind of the epitome of the journeyman wrestler. He was really good, but he never had he had a lot of interesting runs in the territories, in different territories, but he never had a major WWF run. He did wrestle on television for the WWF several times as enhancement talent, and he wrestled a lot for Jim Crockett, I guess, but again, is not a top tier talent, but he did so many great things in so many areas. And later on in life, he became a hugely successful independent wrestling promoter. How? After the territories died and the Monday Night Wars had relit the pro wrestling zeitgeist for the average fan, he started doing what became the state fair circuit and promoting guaranteed shows, meaning didn't matter how many tickets he sold, they were paid shows. So he knew how much money he was going to make at each show before he even got there. So that's a lot easier to feel secure with than, like, let's say, doing what I did and co-promote some indie shows and hope, we're going to sell enough tickets to break even. So he actually did it really well at a very good time when I think he started around 98. And, 98, the business was on fire, of course, right? Monday Night Raw was going head to head with Nitro. The Attitude Era was beginning. So if you had wrestling independently and you had a bunch of big names, you're probably going to get a big crowd anyway, because wrestling got super hot at that time, as you know all too well. And I know all too well, and many of our viewers know all too well. But Jerry Gray had his own career before that, and that's what I'm also majorly going to touch on. And I really also feel bad that he's so unsung because, well, he also, like his last 13 years of life were very difficult. He was struggling with colon cancer, and eventually, with the help of the Cauliflower Alley Club and GoFundMe, which I mentioned earlier, which in previous eras did not exist, he raised a ton of money to help with his medical expenses. He gave it the good fight, and that's when he stopped promoting, is when he got sick, basically, which is about 13 years ago. And he managed to live with his illness, though he struggled a lot, and was a pretty cool guy. And unfortunately, a few months ago, not even a few months ago, I think at the end of May, he lost his battle with colon cancer, unfortunately, and at the tender young age of 61 or 62. Jerry Gray passed away recently, but looking back at his life, it was a very interesting one. He was not a loud, colorful, flashy guy like Hickerson, but he was a very talented worker. He had a great physique. He was dedicated to his craft, and he was so good that when he got to the WWF, most of the management didn't know him there. You know who was his biggest supporter when they hired him, just like randomly, because they would just bring in guys from wherever at that period in 87 they were shooting TV from. You know who his biggest proponent in the WWF basically was, aside from the wrestlers who knew him from before? I'll let you, well, you'll never be able to guess. It's so obscure, but it's so interesting. Who Jerry Gray's biggest WWF proponent was that he should get a job there or whatever, not just do jobs on television. Give up?
I'm gonna take two guesses.
Okay.
I'm gonna say either Pat Patterson or Luigi Patterson, as we've so appropriately called him, or Mario Mancini.
Well, they're both very good guesses. If I was wearing a hat, I would take it off to you, David. Those are great guesses from the dark shadow of podcast wrestling, Mr. David Buchanan. But unfortunately, no, great guesses, but it was not Patterson or Mancini. In fact, it was none other than a guy that Jesse the Body Ventura used to make fun of on a regular basis on the TV shows, and it was none other than Sir Oliver Humperdinck. How do you like that? You remember
okay,
Jesse? Yeah.
Nobody, I wouldn't have guessed it, and I don't think any of our viewers would have.
No, absolutely not.
Good trivia question, though. I'll take a mental note of that, and if ever I ask a trivia question, those of you that are watching, don't spoil it.
Sounds good. And do you remember Jesse making fun of Oliver Humperdinck? It used to crack me up.
No, I do not recall Jesse the Body Ventura making fun of Sir Oliver Humperdinck, but you know his name is Humperdinck, so you can make so many innuendo or insulting or witty references to that name, Humperdinck, just like Engelbert Humperdinck.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing, but also something that would never fly today, which Jesse was even accused of when he first came back on that first Saturday Night's Main Event reboot there. But basically, he would make fun of Humperdinck for his appearance, and in one unfortunate, you know how they used to have those little windows, like the wrestlers would be in the ring, and you'd have a wrestler, a manager, somebody make a comment in the little square window they would open on.
Yes.
On one, yeah.
Yes.
So in one of them, and they had Humperdinck on there, but he wasn't really cutting a promo for Bam Bam Bigelow or Paul Orndorff or against one of the heels. They just showed him on there having the time of his life eating one of the famous WWF ice cream bars. And he didn't say a word. He was wolfing it down and drooling, and he just looked ridiculous. And it was really, really very unfortunate. Let's put it that way. He couldn't wolf it down fast enough, and Jesse had a field day. He didn't, not the only time, but that was very memorable because Humperdinck was a good talker, but no, let's have him just shovel an ice cream bar down his gullet and make guttural noises. So Ventura tore him apart. I remember all the times he made fun of him pretty much, but that was, Humperdinck was helping Ventura make fun of him basically. But yeah, back to our story. But it's just an interesting sidebar, as you would say. So Humperdinck remembered how great Jerry Gray was. So when Jerry Gray came to do a TV taping to do some jobs for the established talent, Humperdinck said, "This guy's really good. You should really keep an eye on him." And he was good. He wasn't super good in these squash matches because he was just there to get beat up. But in general, he was good. And if you go back, you may be able to find a couple of these matches because he wrestled everybody from the Macho Man Randy Savage to Sam Houston to Ming Haku and Tama, the Islanders. There was a good squash against the One-Man Gang, I recall, the aforementioned man who would become Akeem, the African Dream. He wrestled a bunch of those. I think, did he wrestle the Bulldogs? I'm not sure. Maybe. Anyway, so that didn't last long. He only wrestled at a couple TV tapings. I don't know why that didn't continue. But Jerry Gray's career was actually a lot more multi-layered than that. He started out in the year 1981, and he started out being trained by a guy named Louis Tillett. Does that name ring a bell for you, David? Louis Tillett?
No.
Well, Louis Tillett had a hand in training somebody else whose name I know that you know, and that's none other than Terry Bollea, a.k.a. Hulk Hogan, a man who gave Hulk Hogan his break in Alabama, Louis Tillett, and in Florida. The same guy who gave Hogan basically his break and helped train him a bit was also the guy who trained Jerry Gray. And Louis Tillett, during this period, was in a very unfortunate position because he was running opposition, what they called outlaw wrestling back then, what now would be called indie wrestling, running opposition to none other than the uber powerful Eddie Graham in Florida. Now, Eddie Graham was so powerful at that time that you not only did you not want to run opposition, he was even figuratively in bed with Vince McMahon Sr. exchanging talent. So Eddie Graham was a super powerful guy. He launched Dusty Rhodes onto the great career that he had by the time that he got to Florida. And, but Eddie Graham unfortunately made a few quote unquote enemies, and three of them, none other than legendary old time wrestler Don Curtis and Louis Tillett and the aforementioned Boris Malenko, the guy that trained Van Hammer, co-trained Van Hammer, ironically, decided to run opposition to Eddie Graham's Florida Championship Wrestling. And they called this organization, I believe, Sunbelt Pro Wrestling, or something like that, Sunbelt Pro Wrestling. And they brought in some good talent for a short time, and Gray was a young talent there. Unfortunately, though, you're not going to last long if you're fighting Eddie Graham at that time, and Graham did not like outlaw wrestling. It's not like Memphis where they put up with Randy Savage and Lanny Poffo's dad and them running Opposition, the ICW outlaw group. Like in Florida, Eddie Graham really despised that. So he managed to put Sunbelt Wrestling out of business in like 6 months. Like he just squashed them. And he had many, I won't get into all the methods and tricks he used, but squashed them like a proverbial bug, basically. But Jerry Gray was so wet behind the ears and young and rookie-ish that, he barely understood a lot of this, because when he was trained by Louis really didn't smarten him up much to the business. He even believed wrestling was kind of real. They used to beat him up for real. He didn't even know wrestling was a work that much. That's how crude the training was. And eventually, though, he worked his way to Eddie Graham because he was there in Florida, and and he presented himself to Eddie, and Eddie liked him at first, the first moment he met him, because he had a bodybuilder's physique. He had a mane of blonde hair. He's a good-looking guy, looked like a great athlete, and Eddie Graham was like, "Whoa, who are you, young man?" And he says, "Well, I'm Jerry Gray." And they hit it off for a few minutes, and then Graham asks him the dreaded question, "Who trained you?" And Jerry Gray, being very rookie-like and not understanding wrestling politics, said, "Oh, Louis Tillett trained me." And then Graham got the most angry look on his face because he hated Louis Tillett with a passion for being a turncoat and turning against him and running opposition to him. So he decided, okay, I'll take you, Mr. Gray, but he had guys go in there and beat him up, including the aforementioned Haku Ming at that time, who was a young powerhouse in the Florida wrestling world. And so Jerry Gray got his ass handed to him, for lack of a better term, a whole bunch of times. But it proved to be good training. And then Gray started moving to other territories. He moved to Bill Watts's Mid-South Wrestling. He had a very brief series of matches then with Tom Zink, a guy I love talking about, who's also underappreciated, who all no longer with us, of course, who basically only lasted a week in Mid-South Wrestling because his father happened to get ill and whatever was going on. And Bill Watts couldn't believe that Zink would pass up such an opportunity and felt bad that Gray went from losing to Tom Zink to basically not even having Tom Zink and having to arrange for substitutes. And Gray had an interesting time there. You learn a lot in Mid-South Wrestling. That's what wrestlers say. I mean, you learn, and promoters and others say that the very long drives between matches, wrestling 7-8 times a week, and some great talent. You learn a lot. And Jerry Gray did learn a lot. And he went from Mid-South Wrestling. He wrestled for other groups too, like the NWF up in Buffalo, New York. He wrestled, I think, in Ohio. I know he had a big match. I'll talk about that later. He had a very good run in Oregon, actually, in Pacific Northwest Wrestling, and they decided to push him pretty hard, and he became a Northwest Tag Team Champion, which is pretty prestigious. It's one of my favorite territories, the Pacific Northwest area, run by Don Owen and his brother Elton Owen, who used to run one or two of the smaller cities. And I'll tell you that Jerry Gray had a good tag team title run in the Pacific Northwest. I'm going to put this as a trivia question to you, David. His tag team championship partner was a guy who went on to become a very good and very well-known wrestling trainer. Can you guess who that might be?
Jerry Gray. Now we're talking about Jerry Gray.
Yes, a tag team champion in the Pacific Northwest with a guy who went on to become a very well-respected wrestling trainer.
Well, I'm gonna do this. Do I have a time limit?
Well, I just wanted you to take a quick guess. I didn't want you to look it up. Or...
Yeah, well. Is it none other than Dr. Tom Pritchard, the brother of Brother Bruce Pritchard?
That's the one. You got it. Tom Pritchard, the doctor, the brother of, yes, the somewhat infamous used car salesman, Slick Oil. Yeah, exactly. Snake
and
Oil.
The artful Dodger, Brother Bruce.
Brother Bruce. Well, well, what can we say about Bruce? We love him, right?
I love Brother Bruce so much. I got him where you don't believe I have him because I got my morning deuce with Bruce. He
Yeah.
started it, not me. Well, no. That's a sidebar. Okay, because I do have, fun fact. I do have a loose Jack's classic superstar figure of Bruce Pritchard, Brother Love, right on my toilet bowl. And people always joke about it or see it and they're like, "Whoa, what's that doing there?" I said, "Well, it's because whenever I wake up in the morning, I take a morning deuce with Bruce." Hey, he started that, not he started that term, the morning deuce with Bruce. I didn't.
Yeah.
And
Well,
this
that's
is back.
good.
This is back when he used to have the morning deuce with Bruce. Used to be an exclusive show for Patreon members, but then eventually it ended up getting uploaded or downloaded onto the Something to Wrestle with YouTube channel. So I just went along with it. I mean, I'm just telling that story. I'm just throwing that out there. I
Well,
know
that's your
it's
story.
a
And
weird, weird thing, folks, ladies and gentlemen. I know it's a weird thing, but anyway.
well, if you think that's weird, wait if I tell my horrendous Jerry Gray, Jake the Snake stories. But we'll see about that one. But thank you for sharing that sidebar. Most interesting. And you got it. Jerry Gray was tag team championship partners with Dr. Tom Pritchard, who was a very hot property in the independent scene in those days. His work in Continental and on the wrestling scene, along with guys like Ted Petty, the Cheetah Kid at that time, Ted Petty, before he became Flyboy Rocco Rock. I mean, this is the stuff that wrestling fans in the 80s who didn't have access to all the promotions through videotape or television, like we relied on the magazines and we relied on the recap shows like here in Canada with Ed Whalen and Pro Wrestling Plus, or if you were lucky enough to get Joe Pedicino and Gordon Soley's Pro Wrestling This Week, you would be excited if you got to see guys like Tom Pritchard. He was really great. Of course, he was great later on in Smoky Mountain, the WWF, as a trainer, but I mean, at this period in his career, he was young, he was hungry, and he was a really hot property. He was not signed to a major league at this time. So, anyway, worth mentioning, him and Jerry Gray, great tag champs. Jerry Gray also had a very interesting gimmick when he went to Memphis because he wasn't so much just a wrestler. He was basically a spiritual guide to a tag team at that time. And, I should mention, very interestingly, when he was in the Oregon area, the Pacific Northwest, he got to spend a lot of time with a guy we talk about sometimes on this show, and I'm talking about none other than Billy Jack Haynes. Billy Jack Haynes.
That
So
must have been some fun, if not whack times, because I call him Billy Whack Haynes.
Well, I do what I do, and what I do, and what you may not know is that people are very curious about what Billy Jack was like before he supposedly went off the deep end. Pardon my expression. I mean, he definitely, not for no reason, was declared unfit to stand trial for murder, at least initially. But Jerry Gray basically says that Billy Jack was really off the wall even back then. Like, he was a nice guy and stuff, but he would go off at the strangest times. And Jerry Gray liked to tell a story where there was this guy who was like a fan, very big, heavy-set guy who, looked tough, and not tough. He was but he looked big. And he would come up to Billy Jack and say innocently, "Hey guys, like, I really love what you do. What do I have to do to get into pro wrestling?" And that's why I was talking about his size, because this guy from the audience, a fan, had the size to be a pro wrestler. So Jerry Gray, who's a really nice guy, would be happy to just talk to him, shake his hand, tell him thank you for being a fan. But Billy Jack, Billy Jack was not content to do that. Just for asking the question, what does it take? What do I have to do to be a wrestler? Now, keep in mind, this is not like those fans you see these days who get in wrestlers' faces in the airport with their cameras, their phones, and Like, this guy was totally polite and wasn't intruding on anything and extremely respectful. And while Jerry Gray was happy to hear that, or happy to get a question and some appreciation, Billy Jack was not so happy. So what did Billy Jack do? No sooner did this guy ask the question than Billy Jack grabbed him from behind in a full Nelson, which was very often his finishing move, and walked him over to the wall. The guy couldn't escape because Billy Jack was so strong, and began to smash the guy's head into the wall repeatedly while he was in Billy Jack's full Nelson. Just for doing nothing, for just asking an innocent question. Billy Jack thought this was a way to answer the question by smashing the guy's head over and over, probably past the point of a concussion, while holding him in his full Nelson. Jerry Gray actually had to pull Billy Jack off of the guy and say, look, the guy was nice. He was just asking a question. But Billy Jack was a pretty special guy, even back in those days, dare I say. What do you think of that?
Oh, well, he was certainly Billy Whack Haynes back then.
Right. So even when he looked like a normal dude and was all jacked up and was a movie star, good looks, he there might have been a few blood vessels and corpuscles and neurotransmitters that were a bit off up there, unfortunately. A few dopamine levels or something that were consistently not firing on all cylinders. Let's put it that way. I don't know if that's politically correct. You want to know who else was pretty wacky, according to Jerry Gray? And this is good, too. It's actually quite funny, this one. Like, the Billy Jack story is disturbing, but he also went for, before I talk about the Memphis stuff that I was starting to talk about, he also had a run in Texas with the Von Erichs in world-class wrestling. And this, he says, was very interesting because he was very young in the business. This is right after David Von Erich died, which, of course, is a pivotal time in world-class championship wrestling. And basically, Kerry Von Erich, Kevin Von Erich, and unfortunately Mike Von Erich were left to pick up the mantle and the baton, so to speak, and continue the race in their late brother's name, David Von Erich, of course, who had died in Japan. And, you know, none of those three guys were really as good as David. They were very good, Kerry and Kevin in their own ways. Mike, not so much, but it's a pretty hard pair of boots to fill, and I hate to use that analogy because, of course, Kerry lost his foot later on, but I could still put it that way. They were hard shoes to fill. So Jerry Gray gets in there, and he's so young to the business, he doesn't even know who the Von Erichs are. He's never watched Texas wrestling. He's never wrestled in Texas before. He's just got hired by Fritz Von Erich, you know, to come in and work. So great, another territory, another paycheck. So he gets there, and he doesn't even know anybody. Well, I don't know if he knows anybody. He doesn't know the Von Erichs. So he's in the dressing room, minding his own business and whatever, and a couple of the Von Erich boys, some combination of Kevin, Kerry, and Mike, come over to themselves and introduce themselves, shake his hand, very polite to the Von Erichs, and Jerry is legitimately happy to meet them. So then they walk to the other side. They're in different sides of the dressing room, and Kerry, Kevin, and Dave, and I keep saying David and Mike are getting ready for their match. And then one of the three walk over to Jerry the second time and stick out their hand and say, "Hi, I'm Kerry Von Erich. Nice to meet you." And then Jerry Gray is looking at him like, "I know, I just met you 20 minutes ago." And Kerry has no memory of meeting him before that. And then Kevin comes over and does basically the same thing. He says, "Hi, I'm Kevin Von Erich, and welcome to World Class." And then Jerry's starting to scratch his head and says, "Is somebody ribbing me here? What the hell's going on?" He didn't realize that they were so high on drugs and so messed up that they couldn't remember what they were doing from 20 minutes to 20 minutes. So they kept coming over to themselves to introduce themselves, even though he'd already met them by the end 4 or 5 times. And so he asked some people he knew. He's like, "What is with these guys? Are somebody pulling a rib on me?" But it was actually no rib. The Von Erichs were legitimately out of it, on a regular basis. But this is the first time that he had met them. So it's a kind of a funny way when he tells the story, because Jerry Gray was such a good-natured guy, and he just didn't know what was happening. And keep in mind, it's not like us. Like, we know. I mean, he didn't even know who they were, really, except that they were Fritz von Erich's sons, and they were like introducing themselves every 15 minutes to him, and Jerry's like, huh? So I don't know if you can see the humor in it, but for Jerry, it was kind of a funny story. And it tells you a lot about the...
Well, this is quite interesting, and it does explain a lot about the Von Erich family. And I mean, this is a story I've never heard before.
Right.
I knew there were problems with substances, but not to that extent.
Yeah, and actually Jerry Gray is not the only guy that happened to. That did happen to other wrestlers who came into world class, but these guys actually knew who the Von Erichs were, and they'd heard of their reputation. The difference this time is that Jerry didn't know who they were, so he's like, okay, here's these young guys coming up to me, welcoming me. Their dad is the promoter, but he's like, he had no idea he never heard of their reputation before. He didn't even know who they were. But Jerry was so young to the business at this time, and if you remember, David Von Erich died in 1982, so this is probably like 83.
84.
Oh, 84, okay, 84. Right, which was eventually when they had the Texas...
1982, 1982 was when the famous, this is where the famous Freebirds Von Erich feud kind of took shape. But no, David Von Erich's death was 1984. You know, I was a few days old when David Von Erich passed away.
Really? Wow.
Yes.
Interesting. Well, yeah, so that's it. So you're right. 82 was the Freebirds' turn. It was the Fritz Von Erich retirement match. Yes, I'm mixing up my years and world-class events. So, right. So this is the period probably like after David dies, but before Kerry wins the NWA World title in Texas Stadium from Ric Flair in May. So he didn't know who they were. Unfortunately, they didn't know who they were either and what they had just done, it seems. So it was pretty crazy stuff. Anyway, fast forward a year or two, and Jerry finds himself in Memphis wrestling. But because he had been in Oregon at Pacific Northwest Wrestling, he saw Ed Wiskowski. You know who Ed Wiskowski was?
Of course.
The great South African Colonel De Beers.
Yes. Someone we tried to talk about a while back, and we had technical difficulties, and it didn't work out so well.
Right. Yeah, I don't totally remember, but I do remember us discussing him because of his death and how fond I was of his work. And yeah, exactly. So before he was Colonel De Beers, Ed Wiskowski, who was a really smart dude, decided to give this character a try based on a cult leader who had settled in Oregon during that time, but was making national headlines for some really off-the-wall, out-there stuff he was doing. And Ed Wiskowski, who had wrestled as Easy Ed Wiskowski and another gimmick or two, transformed himself into the Mega Maharishi, basically imitating a guy, I can't even pronounce the guy's name who he was doing. It's a very hard name to pronounce, but he was a Hare Krishna type cult leader for real, who had settled in Oregon and was making the news because he was, I think they were causing problems or drawing attention. So Wiskowski thought this would be a great idea for a heel character. And because Wiskowski was great at doing characters, he became this Mega Maharishi character, which was really good stuff. Anyway, so when Jerry Gray got to Memphis, he, I guess because he was in Oregon before that, he thought, let's redo this here. And he became the spiritual advisor to Dutch Mantell, who we talked about before, and I believe Bill Dundee was his partner. And it's kind of weird when you think about it, because Jerry Gray is kind of a lot younger than them. But he became their spiritual leader and basically rebirthed himself, if you will, as the great, I think first they called him the Guru, like he was the Guru for Dutch and for Bill. And then he became literally the same name that Wiskowski did. He became the Mega Maharishi as well, doing a version of the character that Wiskowski had done in Oregon. So pretty wild stuff. So he was their advisor. It didn't last a long, long time, but it was work. Not long after he did the WWF enhancement stuff, he also had a good run as the, if you could believe it, the NWA Bahaman champion, the champion of the Bahamas in the Caribbean. Now, this is a territory that I'm guessing most wrestling fans today don't recall, but they had a strong association with Florida Championship Wrestling, which wound up being an NWA territory and literally bought Lock, Stock, and Barrel by Jim Crockett Promotions. So at this time, this is about 1986, the Bahamas were a pretty hot territory and an NWA outpost, and they put on shows, and they had a guy who was basically their Hulk Hogan or their Steve Austin, the same way that you could say, let's say that in Quebec, the way they regarded a Dino Bravo or Rick Martel, like the Bahamas had their guy, except that their guy never had any major success anywhere else but the Bahamas. So it was pretty odd, but the guy was good. He was good. He wrestled a lot in Florida too. I don't know if you remember this guy named Tyree Pride, but he was the Bahaman champion of the NWA territory. And he was looked at the way that Carlos Colon was looked at in the World Wrestling Council in Puerto Rico, or that Perro Aguayo and Conan and those guys were looked at in Mexico and their promotions, and the way even like an Antonio Inoki or Giant Baba might be looked at in Japan. So Tyree Pride could do no wrong. As a matter of fact, Tyree Pride was so over in the Bahamas, Jerry Gray wound up in a feud with him, and he didn't even realize how crazy over this guy was. Now, in Florida, they had wrestled each other, and, he was respected, Tyree Pride, but he wasn't the pride of Florida. So to Jerry Gray at that time, it was no big deal if he won something, a match, and eventually even won the NWA, the Bahaman title from him. So Jerry Gray got this run doing that, except he didn't realize when he got to the Bahamas, you didn't want to be the guy that was feuding with Tyree Pride, because the fans legitimately wanted to rip you limb from limb, the way that we hear those stories in Puerto Rico of, the fans, anybody who assaulted their heroes, like I'll say Carlos Colon, even whoever, would find themselves facing fan violence and this and that. Now Tyree Pride was so over. This is a good story. Tyree Pride was so over in Bahamas that the match where Jerry Gray was going to lose the title back to Tyree Pride, probably to save his own life for nothing else, the fans were so rabid that guess who was, they weren't even the main event on that card. The main event that night, it was a special show. They actually had an NWA world title match with Nature Boy Ric Flair, the defending champion, going against the legendary Wahoo McDaniel for the NWA World Heavyweight title. But in the Bahamas, Flair and McDaniel, even Flair, was not as over as Tyree Pride. Can you believe that?
Like I said, this episode. It's been a long time coming. We've been wanting to do this for a long time, and let me just say, for me, this is a history lesson, and I love listening to you and hearing you tell these great stories. And let's hope that each and every one of you that are or do fancy yourself as wrestling historians learn something from this and take something away, because this is not something you hear every single day on YouTube within the IWC. The IWC is more focused on current product. We dare be different, folks. And if you like what we do, this is just going to be a bit of a segue before we continue on and put a bow on this episode. May I remind you, no time like the present. If you enjoy the content that myself, Alan Greenberg, Steve Rockamaniac, Matthew Jacobs, and so many other contributors that I've had on this channel, if you like anything and everything that we do. May I remind you, and I hate to have to say this and sound like a broken record every single week, please be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you get an alert and so you get noted or you get told whenever we upload or go live and put on some new content. So you see, we are doing something that might take a long time to build, but hey, Rome was not built in a day. It wasn't built in a day. We are building a fan base, folks. Field of dreams, if you build it, they will come. We dare to be different, unlike any other members within the IWC. This is something that is unlike any other. And on that note, let's get back to the story.
Well, thank you, David. And I just want to quickly pause and salute you as well for all the great management and contributions and work that you do as well. And like David said, Freeform Friday, we're changing the game because we just ain't the same. And we're happy not to be the same. We want to be different. We want to stand out. Let the rest of the IWC talk about the same things over and over again, like reconstituted chicken salad. We are different. We are caviar. We are, I don't know, lobster thermidor, if you will. We are a whole different category apart. And let's get back to Jerry Gray on that little promotional note. Promotional consideration paid for by the no, I'm just kidding. Thank you, Lord Alfred Hayes, for that. Anyway, so Jerry Gray, basically, what was I talking about? Yeah, so he was in Memphis as the Mega Maharishi. In the Bahamas. So, yeah, amazing. This is fun. So Flair and McDaniel come in to main event that show. And Ric Flair tells Jerry in the locker room and Tyree and whoever the promoter is, he said, you know what? I know the NWA World Champion goes on last traditionally, but I don't want to follow Tyree Pride. Let them go on last. Wahoo and I will take the second to last match because they knew that whatever they were going to do would not top Tyree. I mean, Ric Flair, as an incredible legend that he is, was not Tyree Pride, only in the Bahamas. So they actually put Jerry Gray and Tyree Pride after Ric Flair and Wahoo McDaniel. Not for the old Hulk Hogan reason that he had a plane to catch. No, just because Flair didn't want to be showed up and regarded, I guess Wahoo maybe either, regarded as less than Jerry and Tyree. So the show ended in the best way possible with the most beloved son, Tyree Pride, regaining the NWA Bahamian Championship. Now, this was all well and good, but what happened by 1987-88 is that Florida Championship Wrestling, and this is after the death of Eddie Graham, of course. We talked about Eddie Graham earlier. His suicide in early 1985 was not only devastating to his family and to other people in the wrestling business, it destroyed Florida wrestling. So Jim Crockett came in, bought it over as one of the territories that he was going to amalgamate into. Well, he had become the NWA by then. By then, Jim Crockett Promotions basically was the NWA. The territories were dying out. It was going to come down to Vince McMahon, Jim Crockett, and of course, Vern Gagne for a while in Minneapolis. Jim Crockett takes over Florida. It goes down the drain. Jim Crockett also took over Kansas City Wrestling, Central States, run by Bob Geigel, a former NWA president, I might add. It goes down the drain. So anything Jim Crockett bought, including Bill Watts' UWF, which was already potentially sunk, down the drain. So Jerry Gray is thinking, my God, he said, where am I going to work? And that's when he decides to get into promoting and starts promoting independent shows under the banner, I believe, of WPW, World Pro Wrestling, or something like that. And he had a very well-respected match. I think it was his first show, maybe even, with none other than the legendary Terry Funk. There's a very well-regarded, and this is on video somewhere, I don't know if it's on YouTube, but Terry Funk and Jerry Gray have a crazy good match in 1988, at the time that Terry Funk had just filmed the movie Roadhouse with Patrick Swayze and was on the verge of a return to the NWA, where, of course, he would go on to challenge Ric Flair in the very exciting summer of 1989 there But Funk made a stop in Jerry Gray's promotion. Now, Jerry Gray went from a guy who couldn't last in Louis Tillet's Renegade promotion to, because Eddie Graham squashed it, to basically having his own promotion, and WPW lasted for a bit. Eventually, of course, as I said earlier on, he would begin running his own shows in the mid to late 90s, and basically would spend the last 15 years of his career before becoming ill, running really lucrative state fair shows. Now, I was going to ask you, David, now there's a very, very controversial story involving Jake the Snake Roberts, who Jerry Gray used to actually share a place with back when he was in Mid-Atlantic Wrestling. I think he shared a place with guys like Gene Anderson, Jake the Snake, maybe Road Warrior Animal, if I'm not mistaken, maybe Hawk, I don't know. But his relationship with Jake the Snake was a very interesting one. They were friends originally, and later on in 98, when wrestling was hot and Jerry started promoting the state fair shows, he wanted to get any big name that was available that he could trust, supposedly, that would work, who was a recognizable name, who had been on either WWF or WCW or both television at one time, and really strike while the iron's hot. So he would hire all these guys who were starting to make a living on the independent circuit because they had finished their runs in WWF and WCW. And so came forth one of the most troubling periods of Jake's life. Of course, you interviewed Jake the Snake Roberts fairly recently in a very, very amazing interview, and we're so grateful that he's turned his life around. But the experiences that Jerry had promoting wrestling with Jake the Snake on top or near the top of the card, these are stories that are not super well known, but I don't even know if I should go into it, but they are off the chart interesting. So I'll let you decide if I should say it, if I should save it for another show, if I should never say it. I don't know what you think.
This is probably where I start talking like Jake the Snake Roberts, saying,
"What the hell you gotta talk about when it comes to Jake the Snake Roberts? What the hell did I do? I don't even remember. I've been a damn drunk in a hat. That's the problem."
So you think Jake the Snake would? Well, I mean, it's public. I mean, if the stories are publicly available, I don't think Jake has a problem. But Jake probably feels badly that Jerry Gray is no longer with us. I mean, him and Jerry had a pretty good relationship a lot of their life. But I mean, Jake himself, of course, would admit that he went down some pretty dark roads when he was, shall we say, off the wagon. I guess, is that how you say it? Off the wagon? And
yeah, off the wagon, partaking in recreational goodies, battling personal demons. You gotta use specific verbiage. You can't just say the obvious.
Right, exactly. That's why I'm trying to be as politically correct and respectful as possible. But I guess I'll tell the main story. It's a juicy one, I'll tell you that. It's a juicy one involving a few people that you know of very well in the wrestling industry, and I guess I'll just tell it. I guess it's okay. So here we are in 1998. Jake the Snake Roberts had finished up with the WWF and did his, John 3:16, all that with Austin, and he got fired as both a performer and a brief period on the creative team. Obviously, you remember that, right? He left in 97, and so he was sinking deep, unfortunately, into his addictions and also looking for work and looking for money. And one of the reasons he was looking for money was to continually fund his habit. And he thought he could turn to his old friend Jerry Gray because they had been best buddies pretty much in the mid 80s, and maybe they kept up their relationship, at least on the phone, or I don't know. They had affinity for one another. So Jerry's looking for name talent to run all these, especially these guaranteed shows where, the promoter puts up the money before you even start, so you don't have to rely on ticket sales solely and what have you. So he figures he's going to get a lot of good names. So he gets Jake the Snake Roberts. He gets Greg Valentine. He gets the Honky Tonk Man. He gets the Bushwhackers. He gets all these people that are finished their major league run. Some of them had, you may remember, well, I think you said you didn't remember this when I had said it. They wrestled for the AWF briefly, which was the promotion run by Paul Alperstein, and I think Sergeant Slaughter and Tito Santana were booking it. And they picked up all the guys in 96 and 95 that weren't working for the big promotions. But even that went belly up because they just couldn't compete with Vince McMahon or Ted Turner. Anyway, all these guys are available taking indie dates at this time. So Jerry Gray hires Jake, hires Honky, hires the Bushwhackers, Valentine, and pays them really well, especially Jake. Jake is making really, really good money for these indie shows, and the reason that Jerry can do it, because the shows are paid for. Unfortunately, Jake isn't using this money a lot for very good things, and he's really, really majorly under the influence during a lot of this time. So there was an infamous show where Jake was in the locker room in terrible shape. Wasn't the first time. They were supposed to have a tag team match with Jake the Snake Roberts teaming with Jerry Gray, who was still working at this time, to go against Honky Tonk and Greg Valentine, who were sort of reuniting their rhythm and blues tag team apparently for this indie show. But Jake, as it happened before, was in no condition to work that night, and he was acting absolutely maniacal in the dressing room. He was even abusing the poor snake that was going to come to the ring with him, pouring beer down the snake's gullet and acting like just, and nothing that the animal welfare people would ever stand for in this day.
Yeah, somebody call PETA.
Yeah, exactly. But Jake was an equal opportunity abuser. He wasn't just abusing the poor snake who was defenseless. He actually was abusing himself. He was going around the dressing room beating his own head against the wall. Never mind Billy Jack banging that poor guy's head against the wall. Jake was banging his own head against the wall and tearing his own hair out. That's how messed up that he was. He was babbling and cursing himself and ripping his hair out, and Jerry could see that he was in no condition to wrestle. But Jake loved the money, and he said to Jerry, he's like, why don't we become partners? We're friends. Like, why don't you cut me in on this? See? And Jerry's like, no, because you're not contributing to the product other than as a worker or whatever. And I guess he knew what Jake was going to spend money on, so he hated to see his friend go down this path. And he said no. And then Jake really lost it. Jake is like, yeah, you don't want to be my partner. Vince McMahon, he's not worthy of being my partner. And Jake is getting more and more worked up, and a lot of the wrestlers are getting scared because he's basically threatening to beat the living tar out of Jerry Gray. And Jerry's like, yeah, you try it. Like, because Jerry had said that Jake is a lot of things and very talented, but he's not a tough guy despite his size. He's like one of the weakest fighters in shoot fighting that you could ever imagine. So he wasn't afraid at all. He says he could whip Jake with one hand tied behind his back. But he's listening to Jake going, I'm going to beat the living tar out of you. And Jake is not in his right mind, unfortunately. And all the wrestlers start getting scared because there's going to be like a big fight that's going to erupt in the middle of the locker room if something isn't done. So all the wrestlers file out of there and just are going to watch from outside. Like there's a little window where they could see, but they all got out of there because they were scared themselves, except one, the Honky Tonk Man. He's like, I want to see what's going to happen. He decided to watch and spectate. So Jake the Snake is throwing stuff around, and then Jerry saying, you better not throw that at me, and just, screw off, man. You're not in shape to work tonight. Then Jake, while mumbling about not being a good enough, not wanting him as his business partner, at one point he takes one of these bottles that he was throwing around. He says, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to prove to you and to Vince McMahon what a real man is. I sound like Rick Rude there, but I'm going to show you what a real man does. And apparently, I should mention, by the way, before the wrestlers left the locker room, there was something else he was doing that was quite controversial. He had a female companion, I believe, that was with him at this time, and he was so out of it, he decided to have her perform a certain service on him right in front of the other wrestlers in the locker room, right in front of them, just to show that I don't know what he was trying to prove. I think you get my drift.
Yeah, we don't. You don't need to spell it out.
I won't. No, I won't. But this is just to illustrate in general how messed up he was. So he starts grabbing this bottle, and Jerry's like, just stop, Jake. Go away. He said, no, I have to prove to you what a real man is. Maybe then you'll take me on. So Jerry's like, what? So Jake decides to unzip himself and fill this bottle with his own urine to the top. And he fills up this bottle with his own urine and seals it. And Jerry says, you better not throw that at me. I'll come over there and I'll kill you. And this time he was serious. He's like, I'll put up with a lot, but you're not throwing that urine-filled bottle on me. So Jerry isn't even going to wait to see what he does. So he walks over and tries to wrestle the bottle of urine away from Jake. And some of it starts spilling out of the bottle and landing on the honky-tonk man who's sitting there basically spectating because he loves to watch crazy stuff, apparently. And honky-tonk, in his great southern accent, you would do a good imitation, is basically saying, not the piss, Jake, not the piss. Stop with the piss.
Not the piss, Jake, not the piss. I don't need a golden shower now.
Exactly. So Jerry's trying to wrestle the bottle away from him. Honky is saying not the piss. And Jake yanks it away one last time. He said, don't worry, I'm not going to throw it on you. I'm going to show you what a real man would do. I'm going to drink this entire bottle of piss. So Jerry says, you're crazy. I don't know. I don't care what you do. Just don't get any of it on me. So Jake is, out of his gourd at this time. And he says, I'm going to do it. And he opens the bottle and he drinks down his entire bottle of urine from the top of the bottle all the way to the bottom. And Honky Tonk is busy yelling, don't drink the piss, Jake. Don't drink the piss. You have to be there. You want to do the accent for us?
Don't drink the piss. Don't drink the piss.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to drink the piss. I'm going to drink the piss, and I'm going to piss it back out.
Exactly. So he drinks the whole bottle, and then he basically is really in no shape to work after that. Jerry says, look, we have to cancel this main event tag match. He says, no, I want to go out there, and I'm going to crawl because I can't really stand right now, type of thing. No, first he gets in the ring. He basically collapses, and he's in no shape to work. So Jerry's like, this is not very good for the audience. So he decides to turn heel on Jake, even though he's his tag team partner, and starts beating the living tar out of him. And Honky Tonk and Greg Valentine join in because they are the heels. So they turn heel on Jake, and Jake is actually approving of this, thinking this was a good way to get out of their match. He's just looking forward to his sizable payday. And then he says to Jerry, the fans can't hear this, and he's like, I want you to get on the mic and tell him to tell me. He said, why don't you tell me on the mic to crawl out of there like the piece of human excrement that I am? And he didn't use those words. And Jerry is like, there's kids in the audience. I'm not going to say that on the microphone. So he takes the microphone. He says, oh, yeah, why don't you crawl out of here like the snake you are? And then Jake crawls out of there. The fans have sympathy, of all people, for Jake. And Jake crawls back to the dressing room, and the show ends. And it turns out the show, actually, by fluke, turned out okay because of the quick thinking of Jerry and Honky and Valentine. So back in the dressing room, Jerry's really, shall I say, pissed, if I could use the word. And Jake is like, I'm sorry, man. And Jerry's like, just get out of here. And Jake wants his money. Jerry's like, I ain't paying you. That wasn't a match. And, please, you have to pay me. And then Jake, so they're going back and forth. And then Jake, I think, starts taking swings at him. And now the wrestlers are getting a little nervous again. They get out of there. And then what he didn't know at that time, Jerry, is they were watching again through the window, and apparently Bushwhacker Luke was providing color commentary like he was Bobby Heenan or Gorilla Monsoon or something, and is basically calling what he sees through the window for the other wrestlers. And Jake is missing with his punches, and then Jerry is bear hugging him to get him away, and Luke is busy saying in his New Zealand accent, "Oh, Jerry's got him in a bear hug," and then he's breaking free, but Jake then is just collapsing, and telling Jerry, I'm sorry, I love you, man. And next thing you know, and Luke was calling this, Jake starts kissing, because he's so tall, he starts kissing Jerry Gray on the lips because he's trying to tell him that you're my friend and I love you. And Jerry Gray is freaking out because he had just drank the entire bottle of urine and now he's kissing him right on the mouth. It's just like totally insane stuff. And you have to, I mean, I'll stop the story there, but it's just absolute insanity that, thank goodness Jake found this. Just crazy stuff.
Thank God Jake has found sobriety and salvation. But let me just say, it's a hell of a lot better to be pissed off than pissed on.
I will say that, and I just want, as one little addendum, I just want to add that the next day Jake was supposed to wrestle for him. I don't even think Jerry wanted him there, but Jake said, "Can you pay me anyway? I'm too sick to wrestle. My stomach hurts something fierce." And Jerry said, "Well, maybe it's all that urine that you drank yesterday." He had a huge stomach. His stomach was killing him. He had just drank a whole bottle of his own urine. On that note, I'm not even going to talk about the fourth wrestler tonight. I got to put a bow on this. This is too much. But
no, it's no problem. I totally understand. I mean,
we've gone long.
We've gone long, but hey,
it was worth it. It was worth it.
We've gone long, but we've been away for too long.
Yeah.
Hence, that's going on for so long.
Exactly. Quality over quantity. There you go.
Yeah. So on that note, we're gonna call it a night for this episode, and we do want to thank each and every one of you that tune in live, not for the duration of the show, even if it's for a short period of time, and even if you watch it a little bit later on. We love you and we appreciate the kindness and the effort that you put in and the fact that you support what it is that we do. I know that it is not something that the IWC normally puts out, and it's something that we do where we dare to be different. And this has always been the goal or the mission statement since Allan and I have been doing this since 2021. We didn't want to do something. We tried doing what others were doing, but we learned through trial and error that we don't have to do what everybody else is doing. We can be ourselves and stay true to ourselves, and that's what each and every one of you should do. Don't do what everybody else is doing. Stay true to yourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
On that note, I do thank each and every one of you for always tuning in. And I hate to sound like a broken record, and I hate to say it for a second time, but I'm going to anyhow. If you enjoy the content that myself and that Allan and I together provide, and not only that, but also thanks to our past guests and our ongoing contributors, such as Steve Rockamaniac, such as Matthew Jacobs, and other guests I've had on, such as Metal Pilgrim, such as David Reese, and so on and so forth, and Kieran Robertson, to name a few. The best is yet to come. And Jeremy Prophet, Jeremy Barnoff. Let's not forget about him. I want to thank him for the time that he took out of his Friday to speak to the likes of me. I want to thank each and every one of you, whether you're viewers, whether you are and have been my past, present, and future guests. Thank you. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you for the bottom of my heart. Have yourself a good night. Enjoy the rest of your week. Hopefully it'll go by fast enough. And take care of yourselves and each other. Love one another. Goodbye. Good night. Thank you, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.